Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're gonna be looking at Canada, and
It's wild up there.
they have a brand new prime minister. And
Yeah.
it's not your typical, changing of the guard kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because it's not just a change in leadership. You know Mark Carney, who's the new PM.
Yeah.
He's stepping into this role right in the middle of a trade war with the U.S. under President Trump. So the stakes are really high.
Yeah. So, let's break this down. First off, can you believe this guy's win? Carney totally dominated the Liberal leadership race. He got like a mind-blowing 85.9% of the vote. I mean, that's a landslide.
Yeah.
And remember, he's never even held elected office before.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting. His background isn't your typical political resume. This is the guy who was the governor of the Bank of Canada.
The Bank of England.
Yeah.
We're talking about a financial heavyweight stepping onto the world stage, and he's chosen to do it at a time when things are really intense globally.
So I know a lot of you are probably thinking like, wait, what happened to Trudeau? It all happened really fast. Well, Trudeau's popularity had been going down for a while, and it was mostly because of stuff happening in Canada, like the housing crisis and, the cost of living going up. Those are things that people feel every single day. And it seems like Canadians were ready for a change.
And then you can't forget about, Trump being in the mix. It's not a secret that the trade war between the U.S. and Canada has been getting worse. And some of the stuff Trump has said, even threatening to annex Canada at one point. Well, let's just say it really shook things up.
And that's where things get really interesting. You'd think that kind of aggressive, talk from the U.S. would make Canadians not support the Liberals, but actually the opposite happened. Those threats and the tariffs that were put on Canadian goods actually seemed to make people support the Liberals more. It's almost like like that rally around the flag effect.
Yeah, and the numbers totally show that. At the beginning of the year, the polls had the Liberals behind the Conservatives by over 20 points. Now it's like neck and neck. What a crazy turnaround.
Yeah, it shows how things that are happening outside of Canada, especially when they're seen as a threat, can really change how people feel and what happens in politics.
So now we have this new PM, Mark Carney, and he's definitely not afraid to be tough, especially when it comes to the U.S. Remember what he said in his victory speech? He said, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win. It was like a total mic drop moment.
Yeah, that kind of strong statement. It tells us that things between the U.S. and Canada might be changing. Trudeau usually tried to be more diplomatic. Carney seems like he's ready to play hardball.
Okay, so before we get into what Carney being in charge means, let's make sure we all understand what's happening with this trade war. What's actually going on here?
Well, to put it simply, the U.S. put a 25% tariff on a lot of stuff Canada sells. They did eventually back off and not charge that tariff on some things, things that were already covered under trade agreements. But it created a lot of uncertainty and tension.
It's like they're playing a super high-stakes game of chess, where each side is trying to figure out what the other one is going to do and protect their own stuff. But what does this actually mean for, normal people in Canada?
That's the important thing. The stakes are really high for Canada. Their economy is really connected to the U.S. And these tariffs could do some real damage. They could even push the country into a recession.
And Carney's made it clear he's not backing down. He said he'll keep the tariffs on stuff the U.S. sells to Canada until the Americans show us respect. That's a really strong statement, especially considering what could happen to Canada's economy.
It definitely is. And it makes you wonder, what does Carney think respect means? Is he willing to risk hurting Canada's economy more to prove a point? And what will the U.S. do about this?
Yeah, those are all really good questions. We'll definitely be talking about that more as we get deeper into this. But first, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got a lot more to talk about with this Canadian political situation. All right, so where were we? Oh, yeah, the fallout from Carney taking such a strong stance.
Well, it's really messed with the Conservatives' plans. Remember, they were ahead in the polls a few months ago. Now they're scrambling to change their strategy. They're trying to say Carney is just like Trudeau, that he won't change anything.
Oh, and then there's that whole scandal about Carney supposedly being involved in moving a company from Toronto to New York. The Conservatives are saying he lied about it, and they say they have a letter to prove it. Pretty juicy, right?
Yeah, this is a perfect example of what Carney has to deal with as he tries to become a leader. Can he deal with these accusations and make people trust him? Or will this scandal ruin everything?
This is it's like we're watching House of Cards, but in Canada.
Yeah.
Okay, beyond all the drama and accusations and stuff, let's try to understand, who Carney actually is. What kind of leader can we expect him to be?
That's the big question, right? From what we've seen so far, he's not afraid to take a strong stance. And his background in finance gives him like a really unique way of looking at the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's already saying that he's willing to fight for what Canada wants, on the world stage.
Yeah. Some people are comparing him to Trudeau, but Carney seems, I don't know, more confrontational maybe.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He's definitely more outspoken, especially when it comes to trade and dealing with the U.S. and Trump. And that might be exactly what Canadians want right now, with how things are politically.
It definitely feels like things between the U.S. and Canada are in a place we haven't seen before. This election isn't just about what's happening inside Canada. It's about how Canada sees itself in the world and how it deals with the U.S., which is like their biggest trading partner.
Exactly. And that's why this whole situation is so interesting. It's not just about who wins. It's about what direction Canada chooses to go in.
Oh, and what about the other parties in the election? We've been talking a lot about the Liberals and the Conservatives, but what about the NDP and the Bloc Québécois? Do they have a chance?
It's unlikely that they'll win, but they could definitely change things. Remember, Canada's system is different. So if no party gets the majority, we could end up with a minority government or even a coalition.
Right. That makes things even more unpredictable.
Definitely keeps things interesting. And with someone like Carney as the new leader, it's really interesting to think about how Canadian politics might change over the next few years.
Okay, so speaking of Carney, let's talk about what he wants to do if he's elected. What are some of his big promises?
Well, he said he wants to focus on a few things: investing in affordable housing and clean energy, pushing for big energy projects like pipelines, and maybe most importantly, making Canada's economy less dependent on the U.S.
That last one seems pretty important right now. With all this stuff happening with trade,
Totally. It's like Canada realized they need to be less affected by what happens in the U.S. And it's not just about finding new countries to trade with. He also wants to make it easier for different parts of Canada to trade with each other, which could really help Canada's economy.
those are some big goals. And we have to remember that we don't really know how Carney will be as a leader. He's never been elected before, so we'll have to see how well he can actually do what he says he'll do.
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? He has the experience and the smarts, and he's definitely charismatic, but can he actually get things done?
Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be wild. Okay, before we get too lost, talk about what might happen, let's take a minute to talk to you, our listeners. If you're liking this deep dive into Canadian politics, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. Okay, now back to what's going on in Canada.
Right, so we were talking about how the Conservatives are trying to stop Carney.
Yeah, they're really pushing the idea that Carney is just like Trudeau, trying to link him to some of Trudeau's policies that weren't that popular, and saying that nothing will really change if he's elected.
It's a classic political move. Make people think your opponent represents the way things are now, even if that's not totally true. And of course, they're using that scandal about the investment firm to make Carney look untrustworthy. And like he doesn't understand regular Canadians.
Yeah, it's a pretty aggressive strategy. Do you think it will work?
Negative campaigning can be really effective, especially when the race is close. It often comes down to who people trust more, who they believe in.
And trust seems like it's a really important thing in this election.
Definitely. Trust in the government, trust in the leader, and trust in Canada's ability to stand up for itself in the world. These are all things that are really important to voters right now.
It's almost like Canada's trying to figure out who they are. They're dealing with all these big problems, both inside Canada and with other countries. And they're trying to figure out where they fit in a world that's changing so fast.
That's a really good way to put it. And that's what makes this election so interesting to watch. It's not just about picking a leader. It's about choosing what Canada will be like.
And what happens is really important. Who wins this election will have a big effect on Canada, both politically and economically.
No doubt about it. This is a huge moment for Canada. The decisions they make now will affect the country for a long time.
This feels like one of those elections that people will be talking about for years. It's so interesting to see all these things happening at the same time. The new leader, the trade war, the problems inside Canada, it's all coming together at this really crucial moment.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at like a turning point for Canada.
Yeah.
So as we get closer to the election, what are some of the big things you'll be watching for?
Well, I think it'll be really important to see how Carney deals with all the pressure. You know he's getting a lot of attention from the other parties and the media. Can he stay calm and focused on what he's saying? Or will he, break down under all the stress? That's a good point. He's already messed up a few times, like with that whole thing about the investment firm. If he makes too many more mistakes, it could really hurt him.
Yeah. And of course, we have to look at the polls. to see how things are going. The race is still really close. And we know how quickly things can change in politics. Anything could happen. A scandal, a big world event, even how he does in a debate. Any of that could change who people are supporting.
It does feel like anything can happen. And we can't forget about the trade war. That's a huge thing that could really affect the election. If things get even worse with the U.S., it could really hurt Canada's economy. And people might blame Carney for that, even if it's not really his fault.
Yeah, that's true. People often get mad at the leader when the economy is bad, even if there are other reasons for it.
So basically, you're saying this is going to be a really close election.
Pretty much. But that's what makes it so interesting to watch. It reminds us that democracy is messy and unpredictable. But it's still the best way we have to choose our leaders and decide what our future will be like.
I like that. And it shows how important it is to be informed and involved in politics. So to everyone listening in Canada, make sure you're registered to vote. And learn about the candidates and what they stand for. Your vote really matters.
Absolutely. Every vote counts, especially in a close election like this one.
Well, we've talked about a lot today before we finish up. Do you have any last thoughts or anything else you want to add?
Well, I don't like to make predictions, but I will say this election could be a really important moment for Canada. The decisions they make now will affect the country for years to come. It's a really exciting time to be Canadian, but maybe a little scary too.
I agree. This is definitely a deep dive we'll be coming back to as things continue to develop. But for now, this is the end of our look at Canadian politics. A big thank you to our expert for being here today and sharing all your insights.
You're welcome.
And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. We love hearing from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. This is The Deep Dive signing off.